The silent betrayal. On my wedding morning, with the scent of flowers filling the air and the murmur of guests awaiting my entrance, I opened the door to my suite. There he was, my future husband, caught in a burning embrace with my maid of honor. His lips were so close that the betrayal was a silent scream, amidst champagne flutes and clothes scattered on the floor. I felt the blood pounding in my ears, but not a single tear fell. I calmly closed the door, while a cold, merciless plan was already burning in my mind. It all began with a single call, and no one would leave unscathed. In Seville, summer smells of jasmine and promises, and that July, the streets were more alive than ever. The whitewashed facades of the Triana neighborhood gleamed under the sun, and from the terraces, guitars practiced bulerías for the Seville fair. Isabella Romero walked slowly through the Plaza de España, letting the breeze that came from the Guadalquivir caress her face. She was wearing a light blue linen dress and holding a folder with the final notes for the ceremony. People greeted her familiarly, with a good morning, and some joke about how radiant she looked, as if the whole city were participating in her joy. She had arranged to meet Clara Mendez at the Café de la O, a place with history where the waiters knew the orders of the most loyal customers by heart. Clara was already sitting on the terrace, her brown hair perfectly loose on her shoulders, stirring her café con leche. She looked up and smiled enthusiastically when she saw her arrive. "Isabella, darling, you look beautiful. The big day is almost here." "Yes, there's so little time left that I'm starting to feel butterflies in my stomach," Isabella replied, sitting down and placing the folder on the table. They ordered a couple of Tinto de Verano to beat the heat and began to go over the final details. Clara was in charge of the guest list, with the same precision with which an orchestra conductor would follow a score. Isabella appreciated this dedication, although she had noticed something in her friend lately, a nuance in her smile that she couldn't quite understand. Mid-morning, Alejandro Varela passed by. He was wearing a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and sunglasses, and he greeted Isabella with a quick kiss. He exchanged a few words with Clara, who returned a longer-than-usual smile. Isabella attributed it to the general excitement of the wedding. Alejandro left immediately, saying he had to finalize a matter at the family business before the weekend. When the waiter brought the drinks, he discreetly left a small plate of seasoned olives, courtesy of the house. Clara took one and talked about the floral arrangements, how she had managed to get the florist to add white lilies to the centerpieces, because they suit you, Isabella. They match your dress. They spent the morning reviewing the menus and discussing the table arrangements at the Cortijo del Olivar, imagining how it would look illuminated at dusk. That night, the Romero family home in the Realejo neighborhood filled with voices and aromas. Isabella's mother prepared Spanish tortilla and ham croquettes, while her father sliced thin pieces of an Iberian ham they had saved for the occasion. Luis, the younger brother, went in and out of the living room, playing music and telling anecdotes. There was laughter, toasts, and the clinking of wine glasses. At a quieter moment, Doña Carmen Alvarez, the elderly aunt, approached Isabella. Her hands, weathered by the years, held her niece's firmly. "Daughter, marriage is not the wedding day, but everything that comes after. Make sure he chooses you every day, not just on the wedding day." Isabella smiled, moved by the advice, and nodded. She had always admired the clarity with which Doña Carmen saw things, and those words seemed like a reminder that true life would begin after the banquet and the photos. The evening continued with family stories, Luis's jokes, and the promise that the next day they would all go together to take some decorative elements to the Cortijo. Outside, in the streets of the neighborhood, they could hear the fair's fireworks and the echo of a cantaor singing old verses. When she was about to retire to her room, Isabella felt her phone vibrate in her purse. It was a message from Alejandro. "Tomorrow, I have to take care of a few details before the big day. Don't worry." She read it with a smile, thinking it would be something for the company or a last-minute errand. And she replied with a, "Perfect. See you at the altar." She closed her bedroom door, took off her linen dress, and sat on the bed, looking out the window at the light of the Alhambra shining in the distance. She felt a mix of nerves and happiness, the vertigo of someone looking out at a new chapter. She did not know that the same city, which now seemed so complicit, was silently holding a surprise that would change the course of her story. The night in Seville fell slowly, giving way to a starry sky and a constant murmur of life in the squares. Isabella, with her mind full of images of her wedding, let herself be lulled by the familiar sounds. And little by little, sleep enveloped her, oblivious to the shadow that was beginning to be cast over her most anticipated day. A fateful day, 2 days before the wedding, the air in Seville seemed thicker, as if the July heat wanted to stay and live in every corner. Isabella woke up early in the family home in Realejo, with the golden light filtering through the blinds and the aroma of coffee rising from the kitchen. Her mother was already giving low-voiced orders, organizing the aunts who were coming and going with dresses, boxes of flowers, and bags full of ribbons and candles. From the street, there was a constant rumor of footsteps and voices, because the whole city seemed to be celebrating, and the distant echo of the Sevillanas reminded everyone that the Seville fair was still going on. Clara arrived at the cortijo shortly after mid-morning, dressed in light pants and a blouse that looked freshly ironed. She was carrying a thick folder with the guest list and the table arrangement plans. Isabella received her in the inner courtyard of the Cortijo del Olivar, where the sun fell vertically on the orange trees and the bougainvillea hung heavy with color. Waiters came and went, setting up white linen tablecloths, while a guitarist tried out chords from a corner. They sat together at a makeshift work table. Clara went page after page, checking names, confirming that each table had the right mix of family and friends. Isabella would add a comment about who would prefer to be near the dance floor and who would need a quieter spot. Clara, with her confident tone, wrote everything down. Between the two of them, they decided on small changes to the menu, remembering to add more fish options for the older guests. Mid-morning, Luis appeared, sweating and with his hands full of ribbons. He had been helping the sound team install speakers in the courtyard. He slumped into a chair and asked for a glass of water, joking about how he had to earn his lunch. Isabella laughed and handed him a bottle, while Clara took the opportunity to review a flower order that, she said, she had to confirm in person. Time passed quickly. The smell of the Cortijo kitchens began to mix with the perfume of the flowers decorating the columns. Isabella got up to check how the centerpieces with lilies and baby's breath looked, imagining how they would appear illuminated at dusk. Clara, tireless, offered to stay until the last minute to ensure that everything was perfect. Isabella thanked her, feeling a wave of affection for her lifelong friend, the one who knew her tastes, her nerves, and her quirks better than anyone. During a break, they sat in the shade with 2 glasses of fresh water. Clara talked about the honeymoon, asking if Isabella was ready for the Canary Islands, for its beaches and sunsets. Isabella, with shining eyes, described the walks she imagined with Alejandro, the dinners by the sea, and the rest after months of preparations. At that moment, a message arrived on Isabella's phone. It was Alejandro, confirming that he would spend the night before the wedding at the Hotel Alfonso XIII, following the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Isabella smiled, considered it a romantic gesture, and mentioned it to Clara. Clara responded with a simple nod and a quick comment about how that would give her more time to finalize details without him seeing anything ahead of time. The conversation returned to the organization, but for a moment, Isabella thought she noticed a strange spark in her friend's eyes. She decided to ignore it, attributing it to the fatigue of so many days of work. The afternoon fell slowly over Seville. The heat became gentler, and a light breeze entered through the arches of the cortijo. Isabella accompanied Clara to the exit, thanking her for her dedication and assuring her that everything was under control. Clara said goodbye with a quick hug, saying she would take a taxi to take care of a few things. Doña Carmen, who had been watching from a stone bench in the courtyard, followed the car as it drove away and frowned. When Isabella returned to her, her aunt caressed her hand and said in a low voice that girl seemed very willing to do many things. Isabella laughed, downplaying it. Back home, the city was bathed in the orange light of sunset. On the terraces, families had an early dinner before going for a walk on the Paseo de las Delicias. Isabella walked lightly, feeling the pleasant weight of a productive day. At home, her mother had prepared a tomato salad with olive oil and oregano, and her father served aged cheese with crunchy bread. Luis was already telling some funny story about the musicians he had hired, claiming that one of them looked like the guitarist of a famous band. After dinner, Isabella retired to her room with a sense of calm. She left her phone on the bedside table and lay down for a moment, closing her eyes to imagine the moment she would walk toward the altar, the murmur of the guests, and Alejandro's smile, waiting for her. She remembered Clara's playful warning not to let her lipstick get ruined before the ceremony, and smiled. The phone vibrated, but this time it wasn't Alejandro. It was a message from the florist confirming that the order was on its way. Isabella replied with a quick thanks and turned off the screen. Outside, the city seemed to stay awake, with laughter and music filtering from the streets. She thought of everything she had managed to organize with the help of her family and friends, and she felt grateful. She could not imagine that in just a few hours, that feeling of control and happiness would be shaken to its roots. A wedding unravels. The July sun streamed through the curtains of Isabella's room in the family home. From the street, there came the echo of hurried footsteps and the murmur of neighbors going to the market early. It was the day she had dreamed of for a year, and every detail seemed ready. Her mother, already in the kitchen, was preparing a simple but loving breakfast. Freshly toasted bread with olive oil and tomato, steaming coffee, and a small glass of orange juice. Isabella went down to the table wearing a light robe, feeling the mix of nerves and excitement that made her pulse race. In the living room, her father spoke on the phone in a firm voice, resolving some last-minute detail with the cortijo. Luis, her brother, went in and out of the hallway with his tie still in his hand, joking about how he would get dressed in time. Doña Carmen had sat in a sunny corner with her cup of tea, observing everything with that calm of someone who has already lived many celebrations and knows that there are always unexpected events. Mid-morning, the hair and makeup team arrived. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of hairspray, and the metallic sound of scissors trimming a rebellious lock of hair. The local photographer, a family friend, began to capture moments. Her mother adjusting Isabella's earrings, Luis pretending to toast with an empty glass, Doña Carmen looking out the window as if she were assessing the weather. Isabella let herself be enveloped by that atmosphere, enjoying every gesture. She thought of Alejandro, imagining that at that very moment he would be getting dressed in his dark blue suit, perhaps practicing tying his tie in front of the mirror. She checked her phone and found a brief message from him from earlier, wishing her a wonderful day and promising that he couldn't wait to see her at the altar. She replied with a heart and put it back in her purse. Clara also wrote early, assuring her that she was already on her way to the cortijo to supervise the flowers and music. Isabella smiled when she read it, grateful to have such an involved friend. However, after the first hour, Clara gave no more signs, and Alejandro did not write again. The wedding planner called near noon to say that Alejandro was running a few minutes late, that there was nothing to worry about. Isabella accepted the explanation with a nervous laugh, thinking that perhaps he needed a moment to calm his nerves. The family began to get dressed. Isabella put on her lace dress with the help of her mother, feeling how the soft fabric adapted to her body. Doña Carmen approached to pin a small ornament on her waist, a small embellishment that had belonged to her grandmother. Luis made a funny comment to break the tension, and everyone laughed. The clear light of Seville was reflected on the walls, and from the neighborhood came the aroma of jasmine mixed with that of the food being cooked for lunch. At 1 p.m, an antique car, decorated with flowers, waited at the door to take them to the cortijo. Isabella took a deep breath and let herself be accompanied by her mother and Doña Carmen to the vehicle. The journey was brief, crossing cobblestone streets and squares full of curious tourists. Upon arriving at the Cortijo del Olivar, the heat was intense, but the shade of the orange trees in the courtyard offered a respite. Guests and family members settled into the white chairs, commenting on the good weather and admiring the decoration. The planner approached again, this time with a slightly furrowed brow. She explained that Alejandro had not yet arrived and that he was not answering his phone. Isabella felt a small knot in her stomach, although she tried to hide it. She asked about Clara and was surprised to learn that no one had seen her for more than 20 minutes. She asked her cousin Emma, who confirmed that Clara had left with the excuse of checking something at the entrance and had not returned. Upon hearing this, Luis offered to call Alejandro himself, but he only got voicemail. Isabella tried to stay calm. She looked around, seeing the guests already seated, the musicians tuning their instruments, her father talking to a cousin, and the staff of the cortijo making final adjustments. Everything was ready, and yet 2 essential people were missing. 15 more minutes passed, and the atmosphere began to fill with murmurs. Isabella felt that every look toward her was a silent question. Doña Carmen approached and took her hand. In a low, firm voice, she told her that if she wanted to find answers, she shouldn't wait any longer. Isabella nodded, although deep down a part of her wanted to deny what she was intuiting. With a quick gesture, she turned to her father and asked for the car keys. She said she was going to check something, and that she needed to go to the Hotel Alfonso XIII. Doña Carmen immediately stood up to accompany her. Luis, with a look of unease, asked if she was sure, but Isabella was already walking toward the exit. In the parking lot, the sun was beating down hard, and the air smelled of hot stone and orange leaves. Isabella opened the car door with steady hands, even though her heart was pounding. She knew that the hotel was not far, just a few minutes away, but the journey seemed like an infinite distance. Through the window, she saw how the streets narrowed, and the traffic mixed with the pedestrians who were enjoying the fair. Doña Carmen remained silent the entire way, looking straight ahead with the same determination as Isabella. The city moved around them as if nothing were happening, oblivious to the feeling that something important was about to be discovered. On the horizon, the silhouette of the hotel appeared, majestic on the hill, and the glint from its windows made Isabella shiver. As they parked in front of the entrance, Isabella took a deep breath and prepared for what she might find. She knew there was no going back, and that, by crossing that door, her wedding day would no longer be the same. Deep in her chest, the knot tightened, a premonition that the answer she was looking for might be the one she least wanted to hear. The cold, hard truth. The elevator in the Hotel Alfonso XIII rose with a slowness that Isabella found unbearable. She felt every second stretch out, accompanied by the constant hum of the motor and the slight swaying of the cabin. Doña Carmen, by her side, kept her purse in her lap and her lips pressed together, watching the numbers ascend slowly. Luis and his parents had decided to follow them, staying a few steps behind to give Isabella some privacy, although they all shared the same focused attention. The hotel lobby had been a welcoming place a few minutes earlier, with its red carpet, bronze lamps, and the polite murmur of the receptionists. Now, every detail felt like part of a cold stage, foreign to any joy. The receptionist, an elderly woman with a soft voice, had handed over the key to room 312 without asking any questions. She immediately recognized her as the bride she had seen on local news for her wedding at the Cortijo. She offered a smile that mixed kindness and a contained pity, as if she had understood that something was not right. Isabella held the key tightly, feeling the cold metal in her palm as she walked toward the hallway. The corridor was carpeted in a burgundy tone that muffled the sound of footsteps. The walls, covered in dark wood panels, were illuminated by sconces that cast a warm but dim light. As she approached the end, the air became denser. Isabella breathed deeply, trying to maintain control. Her mind was filled with hypotheses. Maybe Alejandro was sick. Maybe he had overslept. Maybe he had a problem with his suit. She did not want to listen to the inner voice that, in silence, was already whispering another truth. In front of the door, she stopped. She rested her hand on the carved wood, and for an instant closed her eyes to gather courage. Doña Carmen stood next to her and told her in a low voice that she was there for whatever she needed. Behind them, Luis avoided looking at her directly, and her mother, with a frown, seemed to be holding back the urge to intervene. From the other side of the door, faint sounds could be heard, a rustle of sheets, a muffled murmur, the soft thud of an object falling onto the carpet. Isabella turned the key and felt the metallic click that chilled her blood. She pushed the door open slowly. The cool air from inside hit her face, an artificial coldness that contrasted with the heat outside. The light was filtered by thick curtains, leaving the room in an intimate dimness. The first glance showed her a mess she did not expect. On the floor, Alejandro's dark blue suit lay wrinkled, with the shirt open to one side and the tie in a tangle. Nearby, a lavender-colored maid of honor's dress was half-hanging from a chair. On the nightstand, an empty bottle of champagne and 2 glasses with traces of dried bubbles, and in the bed, Alejandro and Clara. They were sleeping on their sides, intertwined, with her hair spread out on his chest. The wrinkled sheets showed enough for any explanation to be useless. Isabella felt all the air escape from her lungs. The room spun for an instant, and she had to grab onto the doorframe to keep her balance. Time seemed to stop. Neither of them moved at first. Then, Alejandro slowly opened his eyes, confused. It took him a few seconds to focus, and when he recognized Isabella's figure, his expression changed from bewilderment to pure panic. Clara stirred, waking with a dazed gesture, and half sat up, holding the sheet against her body. Isabella didn't say anything right away. She observed every detail. Clara's jewelry on the dresser, Alejandro's shoes in a corner, a couple of cell phones charging on the nightstand. Everything formed a clear picture, with no need for explanations. Doña Carmen, behind her, broke the silence with a firm whisper. She told her that she had seen enough, that she should leave if she wanted to, but Isabella did not move. Alejandro tried to sit up completely, searching for words. His voice trembled as he said her name, assuring her that he could explain. Clara, with her gaze lowered, kept repeating that it wasn't what it looked like. Those phrases, heard so many times in movies, sounded hollow at that moment. Isabella lifted her chin and, in a controlled tone, told them not to bother inventing anything, that what she saw was enough to understand everything. Luis, who had entered after hearing the murmurs, stood motionless, clenching his jaw. His father, by the door, kept his arms crossed, with a mix of anger and disappointment in his eyes. Isabella's mother put a hand to her mouth, unable to hold back a sigh that was almost a lament. Silence fell again, broken only by the distant sound of a service cart rolling down the hallway. Alejandro, still sitting in bed, reached out a hand to Isabella, asking her to talk in private. She looked at him without moving, and her answer was a resounding no, said calmly. She told him that he had humiliated not only her, but both families, and that she did not plan to hide it to protect his image. She put the key in her purse, took a step back, and announced that everyone present should stay there for a few minutes. She had to make some calls. She went out into the hallway, dialing the number of Alejandro's mother to ask her to come up with his father and his sister. Then she called the wedding planner, her cousin Emma, and a couple of close friends who were already at the cortijo. Her words were concise, that they should come, that there was something they had to see. Inside the room, Clara and Alejandro were moving nervously, getting dressed quickly. Their whispers were barely audible, but Isabella did not need to listen to them to guess that they were looking for a story that could soften what had happened. She remained in the hallway, standing next to Doña Carmen, feeling a strange serenity, as if a part of herself had already gone from pain to an unbreakable resolution. Little by little, footsteps were heard approaching down the corridor. The faces of the newcomers, first confused, were transformed upon entering and seeing the scene. Alejandro's mother paled, his sister Elena looked down, and his father sighed deeply like someone admitting defeat. No one said anything for several seconds. Isabella broke that silence, explaining that there would be no wedding, that the groom had decided to spend the morning with the maid of honor instead of being where he should be. She did not yell or cry. Her voice was clear, each word articulated carefully, as if she were reading a press release. Then she turned around and walked toward the elevator. Doña Carmen was the first to follow her, then Luis and her parents. As they descended, Isabella felt the air returning to her lungs. The plan began to form in her mind. It was not just about canceling the wedding, but about making it clear, in front of everyone, why. Outside, the sun was still shining on the city, oblivious to what was happening inside those walls. Isabella adjusted her veil, took a deep breath, and knew that she was not yet finished. The most important part was yet to come. A public proclamation, the central square of the Cortijo del Olivar, was filled with murmurs and the sound of a guitar being tuned under the pergola. The guests waited patiently, some sipping cold water, others fanning themselves against the July heat. Children ran between the tables, oblivious to the tension that was beginning to float in the air. The wedding planner paced back and forth, her earpiece in her ear and her brow furrowed, trying to maintain order. In a corner, the freshly placed flowers began to wilt in the sun, and the aroma of jasmine mixed with that of the newly varnished chairs. Isabella appeared at the main entrance, accompanied by Doña Carmen, her brother Luis, and her parents. She walked slowly, with her head held high and her veil floating slightly in the breeze. She was not smiling. Each step resonated in the silence that was forming as the guests realized her arrival without the groom. Her eyes searched for familiar faces, and in them, she saw the same voiceless question. What has happened? Upon reaching the center of the courtyard, Isabella stopped. She looked at the planner, who immediately approached, but Isabella raised her hand to stop any questions. Her voice, clear and firm, broke the murmur. She thanked everyone for being there and said that there was something they needed to know before any ceremony could continue. The murmurs stopped abruptly, and the sound of a glass falling on a table echoed like a small clap of thunder. She asked Alejandro and Clara to approach. The couple appeared a few seconds later, walking stiffly. Alejandro had put his suit back on, but his poorly tied tie and tense expression gave him away. Clara, in her lavender dress, avoided looking at Isabella. The eyes of those present moved from one to the other, trying to read some clue in their gestures. Isabella took a deep breath and, without dramatizing, recounted what she had seen in the hotel room. She described how she had found Alejandro and Clara together, the mess of the room, and how every detail confirmed what needed no words. Her tone was not one of shouting or pleading, but of someone who had decided not to remain silent any longer. Discomfort was palpable in the air. Some guests looked down, others opened their eyes in astonishment, and an older couple murmured, "What a shame," which was clearly heard. Alejandro tried to interrupt her, saying there was an explanation, but Isabella raised her voice just enough to cover his, asking him not to interrupt her. Clara remained motionless, her hands clasped, without trying to defend herself. Alejandro's mother, who was sitting in the front row, closed her eyes as if she wished it would all just disappear. When Isabella finished speaking, there was a long silence. Only the crickets among the orange trees in the courtyard could be heard. Then, with a serenity that surprised even her own family, she said that the wedding was canceled and that she would not allow anything to be said other than the truth. She declared that that afternoon there would be no ceremony, but there would be something more important, a celebration of freedom, of honesty, and of self-respect. She asked the musicians to start playing, and, against all odds, ordered the catering staff to serve the food and wine as planned. The initial bewilderment gave way to a murmur of approval in some quarters. A young guest began to applaud, and soon others joined in, until the courtyard was filled with applause that, although irregular, had something of a liberating nature to it. Isabella smiled for the first time, but it was not a smile of complete joy, but of quiet victory. She walked to the main table, where she was supposed to sit with Alejandro, and instead invited Doña Carmen to join her. Luis and her parents sat nearby, forming a united front. Alejandro stood for a few seconds, as if still looking for a way to regain control, but ended up retreating with Clara to one of the side exits, under the watchful and unfriendly eyes of several guests. The music of the guitar filled the space. The waiters began to serve plates of Iberian ham, fresh gazpacho, and Spanish tortillas. Red wine and sangria flowed at the tables. Some guests approached Isabella to show their support, telling her that she had done the right thing, that she had been brave. Others simply squeezed her hand in silence. Doña Carmen, by her side, watched her with pride. She told her that she had shown a strength that few people in her place would have. Isabella thanked her for her words, although she knew that the strength she was projecting was fragile, and that, when night came, the weight of everything she had experienced would fall on her. For now, she clung to the present, to the sound of laughter that was slowly filling the cortijo, to the aroma of the food, to the feeling of writing her own ending for that day. Luis proposed an impromptu toast. He stood up, raised his glass, and said that although they were not celebrating a wedding, they were celebrating honesty and the courage not to accept less than one deserves. The applause sounded again, this time warmer. Isabella clinked her glass gently with her brother's and took a sip, feeling the strong and fruity wine run down her throat. The afternoon continued with music, conversations, and a strange but comforting sense of community. The children continued to run around, the older people chatted animatedly, and the sun began to set, bathing the courtyard in a golden light. Isabella knew that, despite the pain, she had achieved something important. She had not allowed herself to be deceived in silence, nor for her life to be defined by the betrayal of others. When the sky began to be tinged with pink tones, Isabella got up from the table and walked a few steps away to look at the horizon. The Alhambra was visible in the distance, with its red roofs and narrow streets. She felt an unexpected calm, as if that day, with all its chaos, had given her a new opportunity to decide who she wanted to be. The murmur of the party continued behind her. She closed her eyes for an instant, breathed in the jasmine-scented air, and decided that, at dawn the next day, she would take the first step to rebuild her life. She did not yet know how or with whom, but she knew that she would do so with her head held high, just as she had walked that afternoon in front of everyone. That certainty was her true celebration. A new beginning in Granada. The next morning, it dawned with a clear sky and a golden light that bathed the hills surrounding Granada. Isabella woke up early, not because she had slept well, but because her mind was still replaying what had happened. She sat on the bed in the room she had prepared in her parents' house for the night and listened to the sound of distant bells. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toast was faint, but comforting. She went downstairs in silence, finding Doña Carmen sitting at the table, looking through the newspaper, and Luis frying eggs with an apron that said, "Great Family Chef." The normalcy of the scene gave her a mix of relief and melancholy. Luis broke the ice with a light comment, asking her if she had slept at all, but Isabella only smiled vaguely. She knew she needed to distract herself, so as not to let anger and sadness take over her. Doña Carmen served her a cup of coffee and reminded her that that day the Granada Fair was beginning, with parades, stands, and music on every corner. She proposed they go out for a while, see people, get lost among the colors and smells of the city. Isabella hesitated for a moment but accepted. Staying at home meant going back to thinking about Alejandro and Clara, and she was not willing to give them any more space in her head. Granada, on a fair day, was a living painting. Upon reaching the center, Isabella was enveloped in the hustle and bustle of the streets decorated with red and white lanterns, the festooned horses, the women in flamenco dresses, and the men in short jackets and cordovan hats. The smell of freshly fried churros and fritters mixed with that of fresh flowers. At every step, someone offered a glass of rebujito or invited her to dance an impromptu sevillana. Isabella, dressed in a simple navy blue dress and a light shawl, let herself be carried away by the energy of the place. In the Plaza Bib Rambla, a band played pasodobles, while children played around an old merry-go-round. Isabella and Doña Carmen stopped to watch a dance performance. Among the crowd, she recognized some of the wedding guests who greeted her with respect, and, in some cases, with discreet admiration. She responded with a serene smile. The story of what had happened the day before had spread quickly, and now she was met with looks that mixed curiosity and support. As they walked toward one of the livelier stands, Isabella stopped dead in her tracks. A few meters away, Alejandro was standing, talking to a group of acquaintances. He was wearing casual clothes, but maintained the same haughty posture. By his side, Clara was laughing, although her laughter seemed forced. Isabella felt an impulse to turn and leave, but Doña Carmen put a hand on her arm and whispered that she should not hide. She raised her chin and continued walking, passing a few meters from them. Alejandro turned his head, and their gazes met. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Isabella walked on, without stopping. Clara avoided looking at her, concentrating on her glass. A few minutes later, inside the stand, Isabella was approached by Javier Torres, a childhood friend she hadn't seen in years. Javier, tall and dark-haired, was wearing a rolled-up white shirt and a warm smile. They hugged, and after exchanging a few words about their families, he commented that he had heard what had happened and that he admired her courage. Isabella, surprised by the sincerity in his voice, felt lighter. She accepted his invitation to have something to drink at a separate table. The conversation with Javier flowed naturally. They talked about their youth, how he had opened a small restaurant business in Triana, and his travels through Andalusia. Isabella, for the first time in a long time, was surprised to find herself laughing for real. Javier had a way of listening that made her feel seen and understood, without needing to touch on the subject of the betrayal more than was necessary. In the middle of the conversation, Luis appeared, sweaty from the heat and carrying a jug of sangria. He joined them and, in a joking tone, commented that the fair would not be complete without his sister winning at least one game at the target practice attractions. Javier offered to accompany her, and the three of them walked together among the stands, trying games, laughing, and letting the festive atmosphere erase, if only for a few hours, the weight of the previous days. In the afternoon, as the sun began to set, Isabella separated from the group for a moment to walk alone on the Paseo de las Delicias. The Alhambra, illuminated by the golden light of the sunset, stood majestically on the hill. The murmur of the Guadalquivir River and the distant voices of street musicians created a perfect backdrop for thinking. She took out her phone and saw a missed call from Alejandro. She hesitated, but she didn't return the call. What she wanted to say to him had already been said in front of everyone, and there was nothing more to add. Javier found her there, looking toward the Alhambra. He offered her a paper cone of roasted chestnuts, and they stood in silence, sharing the moment. There were no promises or expectations, just the feeling that, despite everything, life still offered moments of beauty and sincere company. Isabella, with the warmth of the chestnuts in her hands, realized that she was beginning to breathe again without the weight of immediate pain. When they returned to the cortijo that night, the family was gathered on the porch. Doña Carmen had prepared a light dinner of Spanish tortilla, tomato salad, olives, and freshly baked bread. Luis played soft music, and they all had dinner together, talking about plans for the next few days. Isabella listened more than she spoke, but her silence was no longer one of anguish but of calm. As she said goodbye to Javier, he told her that he would be in Triana all week and that he would love to show her his restaurant. Isabella accepted, without committing to a date, but with a smile that left the door open. As she went up to her room, she thought that although the wound was still there, she had found a small respite, a space to imagine a different future. That night, before going to sleep, she looked out the window and watched the lights of Seville stretching out until they were lost in the distance. She remembered her mother's words, "It's not about forgetting what happened, but about deciding what you do next." At that moment, she knew that her story would not be defined by a betrayal, but by how she would choose to live from now on. She closed the window, turned off the light, and for the first time in a long time, she felt that she could truly rest. A new path and reconciliation 3 months after that fair that marked a before and after, Granada awoke with the fresh air of autumn. The sky was clear, and the leaves of the plane trees were beginning to be tinged with yellow and red. Isabella had settled into her new routine, waking up early to open her small art gallery on a quiet street in Triana. The place smelled of wood and recent paint, and the walls were decorated with works by local artists, something she had always dreamed of promoting. The sound of the bells of the nearby church and the aroma of freshly ground coffee from the corner cafe were part of her daily life. That morning, as she was placing some ceramic pieces in the shop window, she received an unexpected call. It was Clara. The voice on the other end sounded timid, almost broken. Isabella was silent for a few seconds before answering. Clara asked to meet to talk. She didn't try to justify the betrayal. She just said that there was something she needed to tell her face to face. Isabella hesitated. Remembering everything that had happened made her stomach churn, but something in Clara's soul made her accept, albeit with reservations. They agreed to meet that afternoon at a discreet cafe near the Plaza de la Trinidad. The day passed with the usual flow of curious customers and neighbors who came by to say hello. Isabella made an effort to concentrate on her work, but the meeting with Clara filtered into her thoughts again and again. She remembered her face on the wedding day, her silence, and she couldn't help but wonder what kind of motivation would lead her to seek her out now. Mid-afternoon, Isabella closed the gallery a little earlier than usual. She walked to the cafe, wrapped in a light scarf and a gray coat. The place was half empty. The aroma of cinnamon and hot chocolate filled the air. Clara was already there, sitting by the window, her hands around a cup as if she were seeking warmth. She stood up when she saw her, but Isabella only nodded in greeting and sat down across from her. Clara began to speak slowly, without beating around the bush. She said that after what happened, her relationship with Alejandro had deteriorated rapidly, that she had discovered in him an even colder and more calculating side than she had imagined. She confessed that the affair with him had been a mistake, motivated by a mix of attraction and her own insecurities. She said it with a sincerity that seemed to hurt her, without elaborate excuses. Isabella listened without interrupting, maintaining a neutral expression. At one point, Clara took an envelope from her purse. She placed it on the table and said that it was something Isabella needed to see. Inside was a series of printed emails, messages in which Alejandro spoke of Isabella with a blood-chilling contempt. They were proof that the betrayal had not only been physical, but also an attack on her dignity. Clara, with a trembling voice, said that she could no longer carry that, and that she wanted, in some way, to repair the damage. Isabella felt a mix of rage and relief. Rage at seeing her worst suspicions confirmed, and relief at having in her hand something that closed any loophole of doubt. She put the envelope in her purse and took a deep breath. She wasn't sure she could forgive Clara, but she did understand that that conversation was part of a necessary closure. She asked for the check, and before leaving, she looked Clara in the eyes. She told her that she didn't know if she could ever see her as she had before, but that she appreciated the honesty in that moment. Clara nodded, accepting the words without trying to force anything else. Upon leaving the cafe, Isabella felt the fresh air on her face, and although the weight of what had been revealed was great, so was the feeling of having regained a little more control over her own story. She walked aimlessly until she reached the San Nicolas viewpoint. The view of the Alhambra, illuminated by the setting sun, was breathtaking. She stayed there, leaning on the railing, letting her thoughts settle. She knew that Clara's words did not erase the pain, but they did open up a space for her to decide how to move forward. Back home, she found Doña Carmen preparing a hot soup. Luis was sitting at the table, reviewing some papers. Isabella joined them, and although she did not tell them all the details, she mentioned that she had seen Clara, and that the conversation had helped her close a chapter. Doña Carmen put a hand on her shoulder, transmitting her support without the need for words. That night, Isabella reviewed the emails alone. She didn't cry. She simply read them, folded them, and put them in a box along with other memories that, one day, she might destroy. She realized that her life no longer revolved around Alejandro or what he thought of her. She had a business, a family that supported her, and new possibilities that were beginning to appear, like the growing friendship with Javier. Before going to sleep, she opened the window of her room and let the cool air in. She looked at the lights of Granada, blinking as if they were small promises. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she was leaving the past behind, not with a slam of a door, but by closing the door calmly, making sure it would not open again without her consent. A new love and healing winter arrived in Granada, with a fresh air that ran through the narrow streets of Triana and the smell of burning wood escaping from the chimneys. Isabella had become accustomed to opening her gallery wrapped in a thick coat and a wool scarf knitted by her mother. The cold did not deter tourists or neighbors, and the place was filled with conversations, cups of hot coffee, and the clinking of cups against the saucers of the corner bar. That morning, as she was adjusting the lighting for a new exhibition of watercolors, she received an unexpected visit. Javier entered with a smile and a box in his hands. He brought Christmas sweets, almond mantecados, and polverones, wrapped in shiny papers. He told her that he was preparing a special menu for Christmas Eve at his restaurant, and that he wanted to invite her to try it before the holidays. Isabella, surprised and grateful, accepted. It was noticeable that the relationship with Javier had grown naturally, without haste or expectations, and that balance was good for her. That afternoon, after closing the gallery, she walked to Javier's restaurant on a cobblestone street in Triana. The warm lights of the place and the aroma of stew enveloped her as she entered. Javier received her with an apron and slightly floured hands, guiding her to a table by the window. He served a pumpkin cream, roasted lamb with rosemary and potatoes, and for dessert, a homemade nougat. While they ate, they talked about Christmas traditions, the importance of family gatherings, and the childhood memories that each one held. Javier told her that as a child, his family organized massive dinners at his grandparents' cortijo, where each cousin would bring a dish, and the adults would sing carols until dawn. Isabella listened attentively, imagining the warmth of those gatherings. She shared how, at her house, Doña Carmen always prepared pestiños and buñuelos, and how her father insisted on decorating the nativity scene with new figures every year, even though the portal was already full. Between laughter and confessions, the night passed with a comfort that felt like it had been there forever. At the end of dinner, Javier told her that he wanted to help her with an idea for the gallery, to organize a special exhibition with works inspired by the holidays, and to raise funds for a local association that supported families with few resources. Isabella felt that that project fit with the direction she wanted to give her life, more connected with the community and less focused on herself. They agreed to begin preparations immediately. The following days were full of activity. Isabella contacted artists, printed posters, and decorated the gallery with simple lights and garlands. The news spread quickly, and neighbors, tourists, and curious people came to ask questions. Doña Carmen and Luis offered to help with the reception of guests and the preparation of a small buffet. Javier, for his part, designed a tapas menu for the event, with seasonal products and traditional recipes. On the day of the inauguration, the air was cold but dry. The gallery was filled with people admiring the paintings, sculptures, and photographs, all with a Christmas or winter touch. The atmosphere was warm, with live music and glasses of red wine served unhurriedly. Isabella walked among the attendees, greeting and thanking them for their support. At one point, she realized that Alejandro was in the crowd. He was wearing an elegant coat and had the same confident posture as always, but there was something different in his gaze. He approached her cautiously and told her that he had come to make a donation to the cause. Isabella listened in silence, accepting the gesture, but keeping her distance. It was not the time or the place for personal conversations. Alejandro seemed to understand, and after leaving an envelope on the donation table, he left. The event was a success. They raised a considerable sum for the association, and at the end of the night, when the last guests had left, the team that had helped stayed in the gallery to toast. Doña Carmen raised her glass and said that she was proud of how Isabella had transformed a moment of pain into something that benefited others. Her words resonated with everyone, and the toast was accompanied by sincere smiles. Later, when everything was tidied up and the gallery returned to silence, Javier approached Isabella and told her that he admired her strength. He reminded her that not everyone is capable of rebuilding something beautiful after a betrayal. Isabella, with shining eyes, replied that she had not done it alone, that her family and he had been fundamental. They stood for a few minutes in silence, sharing the warmth of that moment. That night, upon arriving home, Isabella sat by the window with a cup of hot herbal tea. Outside, the Christmas lights twinkled, and the laughter of the neighbors could be heard in the distance. She took the envelope that Alejandro had left out of her purse and placed it on the table without opening it. She felt no curiosity or urgency. What he thought or did no longer had power over her. She took a deep breath and realized that, for the first time in a long time, she was at peace. She had projects, solid relationships, and the certainty that love and respect are not begged for. They are built day by day. As the steam from the infusion rose in spirals, she thought that winter, far from being a time of death, could also be a time of planting for the future. She went to sleep with the feeling that although there were still chapters to write, the story was taking the right course. A new spring, a new life. Spring arrived in Granada with a burst of colors. The orange trees in Triana were beginning to fill with white flowers, and the air was filled with a sweet and fresh perfume. Isabella had been working for weeks on a new exhibition for the gallery, this time focused on young artists who portrayed everyday scenes of the city. Between the preparation of the exhibition and the organization of a children's art workshop, her days were full and satisfying. The routine had become a refuge that allowed her to feel that each step was taking her away from the past. One sunny morning, as she was hanging the last paintings, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a male voice introduced himself as Alejandro's lawyer. He informed her that his client wished to meet with her to discuss a personal and urgent matter. Isabella was silent for a few seconds before replying that she would think about it, and that, if she accepted, she would set her own conditions. She hung up with her heart beating faster, although it was not fear she felt, but a mixture of caution and curiosity. She mentioned the call to Doña Carmen during lunch. Her mother advised her that if she met with him, she should do so in a public place and without compromising her peace of mind. Luis, sitting at the table, nodded and said that sometimes people seek redemption, but not always for the right reasons. Isabella listened, aware that any decision had to protect what she had managed to build. 2 days later, she sent a message to the lawyer, indicating that she accepted the meeting, but in a busy cafe near the cathedral. On the agreed-upon day, she arrived early and chose a table by the window, from where she could watch the comings and goings of people in the Plaza de las Pasiegas. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with the murmur of tourists and the singing of a street musician. Alejandro arrived on time, dressed in a light suit and his hair carefully combed. He sat down across from her with a contained smile, as if he didn't know where to begin. After a few seconds of silence, he said that he had reflected a lot on what had happened and that he wanted to sincerely apologize. He admitted that his behavior had been unacceptable and that he had lost not only a partner, but a person who had offered him support and affection. Isabella listened to him calmly, without interrupting. When he finished, she asked him why he had decided to talk now. Alejandro explained that after months of wrong decisions and broken relationships, he had understood the value of what he had had. He added that he was not looking for them to get back together, but to close that chapter with dignity. His words sounded rehearsed, but there was a nuance of sincerity that Isabella could not ignore. He handed her an envelope with documents, explaining that they contained his renunciation of any rights he could claim over shared assets, and a donation in her name to the charitable association with which she collaborated. Isabella took it, thanked him for the gesture, and told him that she accepted his apologies, but that her life was already on another course. Alejandro nodded, and for a moment, a mix of sadness and relief appeared in his eyes. The conversation ended cordially. As he stood up, Alejandro wished her the best and left. Isabella remained seated for a few minutes, watching the square. She felt no resentment, only the certainty that she had definitively closed a painful chapter. She put the envelope in her purse, and as she left, she decided to walk to the Paseo de las Delicias, where the Guadalquivir River reflected the soft afternoon light. Upon arriving home, she opened the envelope. Indeed, the documents were in order, and the donation was generous. She showed it to Doña Carmen, who told her that that was a sign that wounds, although not forgotten, can heal with time. Luis, more pragmatic, commented that the important thing was that Isabella had moved forward on her own. That night, Javier came by the gallery with a bottle of wine to celebrate the success of the children's workshop they had organized together. They sat at the large table, surrounded by brushes, canvases, and laughter still fresh in their memories. Isabella told him what had happened with Alejandro and how she felt after the meeting. Javier listened in silence, and when she finished, he told her that he admired her ability to face the past without letting it define her. They toasted to new beginnings, to brave decisions, and to the family that is chosen and built over time. As the glasses clinked, Isabella felt that everything was in its place. The past was closed, the present was solid, and the future was being drawn with the colors she herself had chosen. That night, upon going to bed, she opened the window and let the spring breeze fill the room. Outside, the city seemed to breathe in peace, and she, finally, did too. She thought that it didn't matter how much someone had been wrong in the past. The important thing was to acknowledge it and learn to live with the scars without them weighing more than was necessary. She smiled to herself, convinced that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The last time Arthur saw his wife, she was standing in the doorway of their penthouse, bathed in soft morning light, a gentle smile on her face. She was 6 months pregnant with their first child, and to him, it was the perfect picture of domestic bliss. He blew her a kiss, promised he wouldn't be late, and walked out of her life forever. He didn't know it yet. What he would discover in the next 9 months would not only destroy his world, but would redefine the very meaning of power, love, and loss. This is a story of how a woman disappeared to find herself, and how a man had to lose everything to finally see the truth. Before we dive into this gripping story, take a moment to leave a comment below with the name of your city. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is joining us from on this journey. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Parting Storm. The late afternoon sun was a river of liquid gold, pouring through the panoramic windows of the penthouse that Anna called home. It glinted off the chrome legs of the minimalist Italian sofa, warmed the polished marble floors, and cast long shadows from the abstract sculptures to the state-of-the-art kitchen. At 28, Anna lived a life most people only saw in magazines. She was the beautiful 6 months pregnant wife of Arthur Pierce, a charismatic real estate magnate whose ambition was as vast as the urban landscape of the city, visible from their balcony. Their life was a carefully curated collection of perfect moments, weekend trips to the coast, surprise diamond earrings left on her pillow, romantic dinners at restaurants with a year-long waiting list. Arthur was a master of grand gestures, a man who knew how to build an empire and, seemingly, a perfect marriage. Anna had once believed in that perfection with every fiber of her being. She had fallen in love with his sharp intelligence, his disarming smile, and the way he made her feel like the only person in a crowded room. He was her anchor, her partner, her future. But lately, the anchor had felt adrift. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift had occurred in the architecture of their relationship. The foundation felt less stable. Arthur's schedule, once predictable, had become a chaotic mess of late-night meetings that stretched into the early morning and last-minute business trips that he only mentioned while packing his suitcase. The easy affection that defined them, the casual touches, the whispered jokes, had been replaced by a polite, almost formal, distance. When he looked at her, his eyes seemed to look right through her, his mind already on the next deal, the next conquest. Anna tried to rationalize. It's the stress of a new acquisition, she would tell herself. It's the pressure of maintaining his empire. Or maybe, just maybe, it was her. The pregnancy had made her more sensitive, her emotions a turbulent sea of hormones. She found herself scrutinizing his every word, every glance, looking for cracks in a facade she desperately wanted to remain flawless. Was she just being a cliché, the needy, hormonal, pregnant wife? The thought made her cringe. Determined to bridge the growing chasm between them, she doubled her efforts. She became the epitome of the loving, supportive wife. She cooked his favorite meals even when the smell made her morning sickness flare up. She left small notes in his briefcase, filled with words of encouragement and love. She would send him ultrasound pictures of their unborn son, small black and white images of a future she was building for them, for their family. "Look at his little hands, Rafa," she would text, her heart swollen with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "He's waving at you." His replies were always late, always brief. "That's incredible, right? Can't wait to meet him." The words were right, but the feeling was wrong. They were hollow, like echoes in a lifeless room. One night she waited up for him, a pot of his favorite bolognese sauce simmering on the stove. The clock ticked past 8, then 9, then 10. She called his cell, and it went straight to voicemail. She sent a text, with no reply. A little after 11, he walked in, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, and the cold of a late city night. "Sorry, darling," he said, loosening his tie as he walked past her. "The Henderson Building deal is a monster. I'm exhausted." He didn't kiss her, didn't even look at the beautifully set table. He just walked to the shower, leaving her alone in the kitchen, the scent of his infidelity hanging in the air, more potent than the aroma of her carefully prepared meal. She stood there for a long time, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The baby kicked, a small, insistent movement against her palm. It was a reminder of the life she was nurturing, a life she had to protect. In that moment, surrounded by the opulent emptiness of her perfect life, Anna felt a cold dread settle in her bones. This wasn't just an exaggerated hormonal reaction. It was real. The beautiful dream she was living was unraveling at the edges, and she was terrified of what would happen when it finally came completely undone. She needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed her. Chapter 2. The Fall from Grace. The decision to leave was not a dramatic, tear-filled choice. It was a quiet, logical conclusion. She couldn't raise her son in a home filled with lies. She couldn't let her son grow up thinking that what his father was doing was acceptable, that love was disposable. She had to protect him. And to do that, she had to disappear. The rest of the day, she moved with a strange, detached efficiency. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in her chest, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. She sat down at her laptop, not shopping for designer baby clothes, but researching small, forgotten coastal towns, places where a person could be anonymous, where the sea could wash away the past. She got in touch with a distant cousin she hadn't spoken to in years, a woman who lived a quiet life in Florianopolis and asked vague questions about the southern coast of Brazil. She began to silently extract herself from the life that Arthur had built for her. She went to the bank and withdrew a few $1,000s in cash, a small enough amount not to raise suspicion. She organized her belongings, packing a single discreet backpack with only the most essential items: comfortable clothes, a few beloved books, the prenatal vitamins she was so diligent about, and a small, worn teddy bear that had been hers as a child. Everything else, the designer handbags, the expensive jewelry, the life she had once valued, she left behind. It was all just part of the scenery, props in a play she was no longer a part of. Her final act was the most painful. She walked into their bedroom and took the large silver-framed wedding photo from the nightstand. It was a picture of them on a beach, both tan and laughing, the image of happiness. With numb fingers, she opened the back of the frame, took out the photo, and tore it in half, the sound of the paper ripping a final, definitive severing of their bond. She left the empty frame on the nightstand, a silent, stark testament to what he had broken. She hid the packed backpack in the back of her closet, behind a row of party dresses she would never wear again. As she looked around the quiet, opulent penthouse, she felt a profound sense of detachment. This was no longer her home. It was a gilded cage, and she had just found the key. She would wait for the right moment, a time when he was on one of his business trips, and then she would walk out the door and never look back. She wasn't running away. She was running toward a future she would build for herself and her son. A future built on truth, not lies. Chapter 3. The Emperor's New Clothes. Arthur came home 2 days later, humming a song from a commercial he had heard on the radio. He was riding high. The Henderson building deal had been a massive success, a testament to his prowess, and he had spent the last 48 hours celebrating with Simone at a boutique hotel, a celebration that had solidified their secret partnership in both business and pleasure. He walked into the penthouse expecting to find Anna on the sofa, probably asleep with a book on her lap, ready to be placated with a story about his grueling work trip and a gift from the airport. Instead, he was met with a disturbing silence. The apartment was immaculate, too tidy. There were no magazines on the coffee table, no half-empty water glass on the counter. It felt sterile, like a hotel room that had just been cleaned. "Anna," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. No reply. He went into the bedroom. The bed was perfectly made. He checked the closet. A significant portion of her clothes was gone. Not the expensive dresses or the designer suits, he noticed with a strange sense of relief, but her everyday items: jeans, shirts, comfortable shoes. He went into the bathroom. Her toothbrush was gone, along with her favorite face wash and the prenatal vitamins she was so diligent about. A flicker of irritation lit up inside him. Was this some kind of game? A dramatic, passive-aggressive punishment for his absence? He grabbed his phone to call her, ready to scold her for her childish behavior. It was then that he saw it, sitting on her nightstand. Her cell phone. And next to it, the empty silver frame, its glass staring at him like a blind eye. A cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. This wasn't a game. Anna would never leave her phone behind. It was her lifeline, her connection to her family, to her doctor, to the world. He frantically called her mother, her sister, her two closest friends. Each conversation was the same. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. The last person to speak to her was 3 days ago, and she had seemed, in their words, a little down but fine. Real, pure panic finally set in. He called the police, his voice a convincing performance of a distraught husband on the verge of collapse. The police who arrived were professional but detached, their questions sharp and probing. Had they fought? Were there financial problems? Was she unhappy? Arthur played his part perfectly, painting a picture of a happy marriage and a deeply loved, though emotionally fragile, pregnant wife. The next day, the story exploded. Pregnant wife of millionaire Arthur Pierce disappears without a trace. Anna's smiling face was plastered on news websites and television screens. The media descended like vultures, their cameras and microphones a constant presence outside the Vasconcelos Tower. Arthur, guided by a team of high-priced public relations experts, embraced the role of the grieving husband. He gave tearful press conferences, his voice breaking as he pleaded for any information to bring his beloved Anna home. He announced a $100,000 reward, a sum designed to signal both his desperation and his immense wealth. The public bought the story. Sympathy poured in from all corners. He was the tragic hero, the powerful man brought to his knees by a cruel twist of fate. Privately, however, the narrative was very different. In the stolen moments he had with Simone, his public grief would turn into a bitter, resentful anger. "She's doing this to punish me," he would seethe during a whispered phone call. "She must have found out. This is her way of destroying me, of making me look like the villain." Simone, for her part, tried to be supportive, but a seed of resentment was beginning to take root. She had agreed to be the mistress of a powerful, charismatic industry titan, a position that came with glamour and excitement. She had not agreed to this. The ghostly presence of Anna was everywhere. She was in the sympathetic glances of strangers, in the hushed whispers of Arthur's colleagues, in the very air of the penthouse that still seemed to belong to another woman. Anna, in her absence, had become a martyr, a saint, and Simone was, by default, the villain of a story she couldn't control. Arthur's public pleas grew more desperate, his performance more polished. He sat for a prime-time interview, wiping dry eyes as he looked directly into the camera. "Anna, my love, if you can see this, please, let us know you're safe. I can't live without you. Our son needs his mother. I need you." But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month, the investigation stalled. There were no leads, no sightings, no activity on her bank accounts or credit cards. It was as if Anna had simply walked out of his life and dissolved into thin air. Arthur's public facade began to crack under the pressure of his own lies, the gulf between his private fury and his public grief widening into an unsustainable chasm. He was the concerned husband to the world. But in the middle of the night, staring at the empty space beside him in bed, he was just a man haunted by the ghost of a woman he had fatally underestimated. Did Arthur deserve all this? And how do you think Anna was able to disappear so completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Chapter 4. A New World. While Arthur was performing for the cameras in the city, Anna was 3,000 kilometers away, breathing the salty, humid air of the West Coast. She had become Clara, a name she took from a novel she loved. The town she chose was a small, forgotten coastal spot called Paraty. It was a place of time-worn beach houses, a single main street with a grocery store and a restaurant, and a rugged, windswept beach where the relentless waves of the Atlantic Ocean crashed against volcanic rock formations. It was the perfect place to be invisible. Her new home was a small wooden cabin located on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was old, It creaked in the wind, and the smell of salt and damp wood was permanently etched into its walls. After the sterile, modern opulence of the penthouse, the cabin felt wonderfully real and grounding. She paid the first 6 months' rent in cash to an elderly gentleman who seemed more interested in her promise to take care of the small garden than in her lack of references. Life as Clara was simple, quiet, and anonymous. She was the polite, solitary newcomer who kept to herself. She did her shopping on Tuesdays, smiled at the cashier, and returned to her cabin. Her days fell into a gentle, healing rhythm. She woke with the sun, made a simple breakfast, and spent hours walking on the beach, the cool sand sinking beneath her feet. She watched the fishermen mending their nets and the seabirds diving for their prey. The vast, churning expanse of the ocean made her own problems feel small and manageable. The constant roar of the waves was a soothing balm to her fractured soul, washing away the noise and deception of her old life. To support herself, she fell back on her skills as a graphic designer, a career she had put on the back burner to become Mrs. Arthur Pierce. She found freelance work online through platforms that allowed her to work for clients all over the world, receiving payments through a secure, untraceable system. Her work was her connection to the outside world, but it was a connection on her own terms, filtered through the security of a screen and a pseudonym. She meticulously avoided creating any official records. She didn't get a driver's license. She didn't register to vote. Most importantly, she avoided doctors. She knew it was a risk, but her fear of being found was greater than her fear of the unknown. She bought books on childbirth and prepared herself for the monumental task ahead. She was a good student, diligent, and focused. She learned about breathing techniques, birthing positions, and how to deal with potential complications. Her pregnancy became her private, sacred journey, a partnership just between her and her unborn son. At night, she would sit by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of lavender and rose, and she would write. She filled journals with letters to her son, telling him not about the father who had betrayed them, but about the life she dreamed of for him, a life of honesty, resilience, and quiet strength. She wrote about the courage it takes to walk away from something that is broken and the strength it takes to build something new from the wreckage. "I want you to know the sound of the ocean, my love," she wrote one night, her hand resting on her belly, which was now big and stretched. "I want you to know that your world is not defined by glass towers and empty promises, but by the tides, the stars, and the goodness of your own heart. You are my new beginning. You are my brave new world." The months passed. Her belly grew, and so did her confidence. She was no longer Anna Vasconcelos, the millionaire's wife. She was Clara, a woman who supported herself, propped up not by a man's wealth, but by her own ingenuity and determination. Her labor began on a wild, stormy night at the end of winter. The wind howled around the small cabin, and the rain beat against the windows in angry, horizontal sheets. The power went out, plunging her into darkness, illuminated only by a few candles she had prepared. She was alone, terrified, but also strangely strengthened. As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm raged within her. It was primal, painful, and utterly transformative. There were no doctors, no nurses, and no husband holding her hand. There was just her, the ancient wisdom of her body, and the fierce, protective love for the son she was about to meet. In the hours before dawn, as the storm finally began to subside, her son was born. She pulled him to her chest, his tiny warm body slick against hers, and his first cry mingled with the sound of the receding waves. She looked at his perfect, wrinkled little face, and tears of exhaustion, relief, and overwhelming love streamed down her cheeks. She had done it. She had brought him into the world, safely, on her own terms. She named him Noah, a name that meant rest and comfort. He was her ark in the storm, her promise of a new beginning. Holding him in her arms in the quiet, candlelit cabin, with the ocean as her witness, Anna felt a profound sense of peace. She had been erased, but in her place, a new woman had been born. A mother, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with. What do you think of Anna's choice to disappear and build a new life alone? Was it a selfish act, or was it the only way she could protect herself and her son? Chapter 3. The cost of deception. In the months that followed Anna's disappearance, Arthur's carefully constructed world began to unravel, one insidious thread at a time. He had always seen himself as the sole architect of his success, the visionary, the deal-maker. He saw Anna as a beautiful, supportive accessory to his life, the person who managed the trivial domestic details so he could focus on the important work of building his empire. He never understood that she wasn't just an accessory. She was the foundation. Anna had been the silent, invisible force behind his polished public persona. It was she who remembered his clients' birthdays and their wives' favorite flowers. It was she who flawlessly organized the charity dinners and corporate parties that were crucial for networking, ensuring every detail was perfect, from the seating charts to the wine pairings. She was the one who managed their social calendar with the precision of a military strategist, creating the effortless illusion of a man who had it all. Without her, the cracks began to show. He missed important meetings because he had forgotten to check the shared calendar she used to manage. He offended a potential investor by forgetting his name, a detail Anna would have drilled into him before the event. Deals that had once seemed certain began to falter, his legendary Midas touch seeming to have abandoned him. His colleagues and rivals began to whisper. His wife's disappearance was a tragedy, yes, but the subsequent decline in his business acumen was a weakness, and in their world, weakness was blood in the water. The rumors about his affair with Simone, once whispered speculation, began to gain traction. A disgruntled former assistant, fired by Arthur in a fit of rage, leaked details of his frequent late-night meetings with his head of marketing. The story didn't make the major news, but it circulated with venomous speed through the inner circles of the city's business and social elite. The public sympathy that had once been his shield began to wear thin, replaced by a cynical and knowing suspicion. He was no longer the tragic hero. He was becoming a pariah. His relationship with Simone, which had been a thrilling escape, soured into a toxic codependency. Simone had been drawn to the powerful, confident industry titan. The man she now lived with was a shadow of that person, irritable, paranoid, and obsessed with his missing wife. She had moved into the penthouse, a move she had dreamed of, but it felt like she was occupying a museum dedicated to St. Anna. Arthur refused to get rid of Anna's things. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books were still on the nightstand, her perfume still lightly lingered in the air. Simone felt like a ghost, haunting another woman's life. She resented Anna's persistent, sanctified presence. She resented the pitying looks she received from people who knew or suspected her role in the marriage's dissolution. And most of all, she resented Arthur's growing inability to separate her from his downfall. "If you hadn't been so careless, she might never have found out," he had snarled at her one night, after losing a major contract. "I was careless?" Simone snapped back, her voice dripping with scorn. "You were the one who was married, Arthur. You were the one who lied to her every day. This isn't my fault. This is the mess you made." The arguments became more frequent, more vicious. The glamour of the affair had disappeared, revealing the ugly reality underneath. A relationship built on deception and convenience couldn't withstand real pressure. Simone began discreetly sending out her resume, building her own exit strategy. She had latched on to a falling star, and she was smart enough to know when it was time to let go. Arthur, meanwhile, was trapped in a downward spiral of his own making. He drank more, slept less. He found himself wandering the silent, cavernous penthouse at night, touching the things Anna had left behind, a strange mix of fury and a longing so deep it felt like a physical ache. He had thought he could have it all, the devoted wife and the exciting mistress. He had believed he was in control. Now he was losing everything, and he couldn't understand why. He had fatally miscalculated the value of what he had, and the true cost of his betrayal was only just beginning to come due. Do you think Arthur deserved this? Was Simone right to leave him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Chapter 6. The Golden Hope. Gala. The Golden Hope Gala was the jewel of the city's philanthropic season, a glamorous event where the city's old money and new power collided. For Arthur, it was more than a party. It was a lifeline. His business was bleeding, his reputation was in tatters, and he desperately needed new investors. He needed to project an image of stability and strength, to remind the world that he was still Arthur Pierce, the man who could move mountains. He arrived alone, with Simone having finally and officially left him the week before, a departure that felt less like a broken heart and more like another asset being liquidated. He moved through the opulent ballroom, a glass of champagne in his hand, forcing a smile, shaking hands, his eyes scanning the crowd for potential backers. He felt a bead of sweat run down his back. The vultures were circling. He could feel their eyes on him, their whispers following him like a shadow, and then the room went quiet. Not a sudden, dramatic silence, but a slow, rolling wave of stillness that started at the entrance and spread through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations faltered. Arthur spun around, annoyed by the distraction, and his world stopped. Standing in the arched doorway, framed by the light, was Anna. But she wasn't the Anna he remembered. The soft, compliant woman he had taken for granted was gone. In her place was a goddess. She was radiant, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown that clung to her curves, her hair styled in elegant waves, her face lit by a serene, unshakable confidence. She looked powerful, she looked magnificent, and she was not alone. Cradled in her arms, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, was a beautiful baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's calm, observant eyes. Arthur felt the champagne flute slip from his numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the destruction of his own composure. It was her. After 9 months of silence, of nothing, here she was, looking as if she had just walked out of a dream, his dream, the one he had destroyed. Before he could move, before he could process what he was seeing, several of the city's most influential figures, the very people Arthur was desperate to impress, converged on Anna. There was Jonathan Miller, the respected head of the Gala's charity foundation, who greeted her with a warm, paternal kiss on the cheek. There was Eleonora Menis, no relation, but the matriarch of one of the city's oldest families, who cooed over the baby. A murmur ran through the crowd as the truth dawned. Anna wasn't just a guest. A quick glance at the event program in a nearby guest's hand confirmed the unthinkable. On the list of the foundation's board members, there was a new name, Anna Dubois, her maiden name. She hadn't just survived. She had ascended. The position on that board was something Arthur had coveted for years, a seat that guaranteed access and influence. And she had won it. She moved through the room with a natural grace, politely ignoring Arthur's very existence. She laughed with a tech billionaire, discussed politics with the senator, and charmed everyone she met. She wasn't the victim. She was the victor. Finally, Arthur managed to corner her near a secluded terrace. "Anna," he breathed, his voice raw. "What is this? Where have you been?" She turned to him, her expression not of anger or pain, but of a cold, distant assessment. She adjusted Noah in her arms. "I've been building a life, Arthur. A real one." "A life? You disappeared. We all thought, you were—" "You thought I was what? A victim? Helpless?" She finished for him, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "That was always your biggest mistake. You never truly saw me." "I want to see my son," he said, his eyes fixed on the baby. "His name is Noah," she said, her voice firm and protective. "And you can't?" "Not like this. I left to protect him from a world of lies and betrayal. I won't bring him back into it." Across the room, Simone, who had come to the gala with a new, older, more stable benefactor, watched the exchange. She saw the power dynamic, clear as day. She saw the way people clustered around Anna, the genuine respect and admiration in their eyes. She saw the way Arthur was looking at his wife, defeated, desperate, utterly impotent. In that moment, Simone knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice in leaving him. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost the source of his power. He was an empty man. And Anna was the one who had finally exposed him. Arthur reached out a hand, as if to touch Noah's cheek, but Anna took a step back, her eyes like shards of ice. "Don't," she said, her voice low, but carrying the weight of an iron command. "You forfeited that right 9 months ago on a leather sofa in your office." She turned her back on him, leaving him standing alone on the terrace, the sounds of the party, of his success, washing over him. He was the ghost now, invisible in a room where his wife was the shining sun. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The Golden Hope. Gala was not an ending. It was a declaration. In the weeks that followed, Arthur's desperate attempts to contact Anna were met with an impenetrable wall of silence. His calls were rerouted to her assistant, a professionally efficient woman, who informed him that Ms. Dubois's schedule was full. His emails went unanswered. The legal documents that arrived at his office were not for a messy, emotional divorce, but for a meticulously prepared alimony and custody agreement from one of the city's top family law attorneys. The terms were non-negotiable. He would provide financial support, and in return, he would be granted supervised visitation twice a month in a neutral location upon completion of a court-mandated anger management and co-parenting course. There was no room for discussion. It was a business deal, and she held all the cards. Anna, or rather, Ms. Dubois, had played her hand with masterful precision. The story of her comeback was even more compelling than the story of her disappearance. She gave one, and only one, exclusive interview to a respected journalist. She didn't sling mud or revel in the sordid details of Arthur's affair. Instead, she spoke with eloquence and passion about the systemic challenges faced by women and children in crisis. She announced that she was using her position on the board and her personal story to launch a new initiative through the Golden Hope Foundation, the Project Hope. It would establish a network of shelters and resource centers for women who needed to escape abusive or unsustainable situations, providing them with legal aid, financial counseling, and the tools to build a new, independent life. She had turned her pain into a platform, her personal tragedy into a public mission. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Arthur Pierce. She was defined by her work, her resilience, and her commitment to helping others. The public, and more importantly, the city's philanthropic elite were fascinated. Donations flooded into Project Hope. Anna became a celebrated and respected figure, a symbol of strength and grace. While her public life was one of influence and purpose, her private life remained anchored in the quiet simplicity she had found in Paraty. She kept the seaside cabin, flying back and forth on a private plane, a luxury provided by the very alimony payments Arthur was forced to make. The cabin was her sanctuary, the place where she was not Miss Dubois, the formidable board member, but simply Mom. She and Noah would spend weeks at a time there, away from the noise and ambition of the city. Their days were filled with the simple, profound joys she had dreamed of for him. They would walk on the beach, collecting shells and watching the sandpipers race along the shoreline. She would read stories to him, not of fairy tales about princes and princesses, but of courageous explorers, brilliant scientists, and bold artists. She raised him with the sound of the ocean as his lullaby and the lessons of self-reliance and courage as his foundation. She taught him that strength wasn't about how much you had, but about how much you could overcome. She taught him that a home wasn't defined by the size of its rooms, but by the amount of love and truth within its walls. One night, as she sat on the porch of her cabin, watching Noah take his first wobbly steps on the soft grass, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "I'm so sorry," it read. "I know it's too late, but I'm so sorry for everything." It was from Arthur. She read the message, took a deep breath of the salty air, and deleted it without replying. She had no space for his apology. It was a ghost from a life that no longer belonged to her. Her triumph was not in his regret, but in her own freedom. Disappearing had saved her. Returning had proven her strength. But this quiet, peaceful, authentic life she had built for herself and her son, this was her lasting victory. A year after the gala, Arthur sat alone in the sterile, minimalist living room of a new, smaller apartment. The penthouse, with its ghosts and memories, had been sold at a loss. His company, once a titan, had been forced into a merger, and he was now just a senior executive with a fancy title and little real power, a relic of a bygone era of unchecked ambition. Simone was a distant memory, her face occasionally smiling on the social pages, always beside someone more stable, more powerful. He was reading a business magazine on his tablet when he saw her. It was a cover story. Anna Dubois, the visionary behind Project Hope. The photo was of Anna, standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the wind catching her hair. She wasn't smiling at the camera. She was looking out at the horizon, a look of serene, unshakable purpose on her face. Noah, now a sturdy toddler, was holding her hand, looking up at her with pure adoration. He read the article, each word a new stab to his ego. It detailed the incredible success of her foundation, the lives she had changed, the powerful network she had built. It quoted senators, CEOs, and philanthropists, all praising her vision, her tenacity, her grace. The article mentioned him only once, in a single, brutal sentence. Ms. Dubois, the former wife of real estate developer Arthur Pierce, channeled her personal experiences into a powerful force for social change. Former wife. A footnote in her story. He leaned back, the tablet falling to the couch beside him. For months, he had been consumed by what he had lost. His company, his status, his money. But looking at that photo, at the woman she had become, and the son he barely knew, he finally understood the true depth of his loss. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a partner whose silent strength had been the invisible scaffolding of his entire life. He had lost a woman of incredible substance and resilience, a woman he had been too arrogant and too blind to ever truly see. He had seen her as a beautiful possession, a reflection of his own success, when in reality she was always the source of a light he had foolishly believed was his own. His supervised visits with Noah were stiff, awkward affairs. The boy was polite but distant, a stranger who shared his DNA, but not his life. Noah's world was one of love, truth, and the sound of the ocean. A world built by his mother. A world from which Arthur was permanently exiled. He was just a visitor, a brief interruption twice a month in a life that was complete and happy without him. He finally understood that to lose someone who is willing to walk away, to erase herself and start over, is to lose a part of yourself that you can never get back. He had thought he was the sun, and that she was a planet orbiting him. He was wrong. She was her own universe, and he had been nothing more than a passing comet, burning brightly and then fading into the vast, indifferent darkness. The realization offered no comfort, no redemption. It was just the cold, hard, inescapable truth, the final, crushing weight of his own choices. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, resilience, and the incredible power of a woman who refused to be broken. Anna's journey from a gilded cage to a life of true freedom shows us that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. What did you think of her incredible transformation? Could you have predicted her stunning comeback? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of love, loss, and second chances. Thank you for listening.